The next set of tools are the rendering tools. This is what you do when everything is done. You've got your scene modeled and set up and textured and lit, and now you want to go from what's in the viewport to something that you can use in either a video or a magazine spread or what have you, and you have to render it. So the first button is the render setup. That's self-explanatory. It allows you to set the features. For instance, right now we're at 640 by 480. That means that's standard computer 4:3 aspect ratio. If I turn on save frames in my viewport, let's see, show save frames. You notice how it's almost a square, 4:3. Obviously, it's almost square. This is old style television before HD. If you want to go HD, you can click on this output size, pick HD video, and right now it's set to 1080p, which is perfect. Now you see this yellow line. That is the extent of what the camera will render. So if I move this over, you notice the torus kind of disappears partially. That is because it's out of the camera's view. Another thing about save frames is if you go to customize, preferences, viewports, let's see, where are we? Let me back up. Configure. Sorry. Under the viewport configuration panel, which can be accessed by clicking on this button here, you have a tab called Save Frames. Now, you have two very important save frames: Action Save and Title Save. I don't know why these are turned off by default. They should be on by default, but they are. So you need to come up to the viewport configuration and set your save frames to Action Save and Title Save. And then when I apply that, if you watch down here, okay, now we have different views. Now I need to turn off user save. Okay, so the action save, this light blue cyan line, is your action save. Anything important image wise that you want to absolutely be able to see needs to stay within that blue line. Okay, this yellow line is just the total extent. Now, on some televisions, especially older tube style televisions, the image would wrap around and go behind the bezel of the television, you know, the case of the television. So you'd actually be losing what's ever in this area here. So the yellow line is the full extent of the camera, in this case 16:9 aspect ratio. The blue is what will absolutely be shown. Now the title save is for lettering, i.e. titles. You don't want your title to come out here and start bowing up or enlarging at the ends like it would on a standard tube style television. So the title safe is there. Now, again, I keep mentioning tube style televisions. This is not as important nowadays with modern HD televisions, but it is still something you need to keep in mind. So I'm going to say OK on that and just leave this on. So back to the rendering tools, we have the output size, which is the final render. This will be 1920 pixels by 1080 pixels. Again, that's 1080p or 1080i, depending on whether you render interlaced frames. You have the render output, which is where you actually set up the files that you want to output. In this case, let's say we want to create a PNG file. Let's go to desktop. We'll just call this test. Select our PNG image format. When we say save, it's going to bring up the configuration. You can have alpha channels, which we'll go over later. Again, you can have interlaced. I'm just going to keep the default settings and say OK. Now when I render the image, it will save this test PNG. So I'll go make sure I'm in the perspective view, render, and okay, there's our 3D image. If I go to my desktop, double click on the test, there's my rendered final picture. So those are your main rendering tools: your setup, your render window, which we just saw, and the actual render button. And again, this is after you have completely finished your scene, modeled, set up, textured, lit, placed your camera, all of that. Then you go to render. Now, I did what I tell my students is a no-no. I rendered from the perspective view. Now, this is fine when you're doing test renders, but you generally, by the time you get finished with your scene, excuse me, you do want to add a camera. In this case, we'll come over to our Create panel, Camera, add a target camera, and I can also actually come over here and make sure I'm selected and say Control C, and it creates a camera from that position. Okay, so now I'm in and I've created a camera. I'm looking through that camera, but it's the same position as the perspective view was. This is a good shortcut. It's Control C. Normally in most programs that would be the copy function, but again, we don't copy, we clone. Okay, and clone is Control V, which would actually be paste in most other programs. Again, we'll go over that. That's a interesting subject unto itself. I can move the camera around. Let me zoom out here so you can actually see the camera. You can see when I pan and around here, you can see the camera zooming. And down here, if you notice in my view tools, in the standard viewports, they're all the same. If I go back to my camera viewport, it changes. Okay, we've got dolly camera, perspective, roll camera. Let's show you what that is. That's roll. We've got field of view, also known as focal length. Okay. We've got truck, which is what I was doing with the middle mouse button. And we've got orbit camera, which actually goes around the selected object. Let's see. There we go. Select truck. Okay. Doesn't really work that well. Oh, it's actually because it's a target camera, it's going around the target. I'm sorry. But if it were a free camera, it would actually point at whatever object was selected. Then we have the maximize viewport. It's going to enlarge whatever viewport is selected. Okay. That's the Alt W keys, shortcut keys on the keyboard. The render is F9. Move is, or let me go over to selection. Selection shortcut is Q, move is W, rotate is E, and scale is R. Excuse me. These are considered the home keys on the keyboard. So if you rest your fingers on the keyboard, they're usually up there around Q, W, E, and R, which is why these keys are used for these functions, because they are the most used functions in 3D modeling. Okay. This is your gizmo, right? It allows you to constrain to axes, or planes. Okay. And each of these tools has one. You have one for the rotate, which you can do free rotate, or you can constrain to an axis. You can do that with scale. You can do uniform scale, or you can constrain to axis or planes. Okay. That's the basics of manipulating objects. One thing you've probably seen me do time and time again is use the pan tool. I'm going to go to perspective view so I can do this. Hit P on the keyboard, go to perspective view. Now I can pan if I hold down the middle mouse button on a 3-button mouse. It's also the scroll wheel, but if I hold down on it, I can pan. If I scroll in and out, I zoom in and out, okay? If I hold down Alt in the middle mouse button, I can orbit, okay? These tools will save your life and save you from pulling your hair out, because you know, if you have a 3-button mouse, you can use the pan, zoom, Alt. If you hold down Control Alt and the middle mouse button and push in, you can do a slow zoom. When you do the scroll wheel, it's an incremental zoom, okay, and it's set to zoom in, whatever percentage. If you hold down Control and Alt, it's a more intuitive zoom, okay.